In this video, I'm going to show you how I would solve the specification from the previous session. Now, the first thing I would do, I would design a database. I'd go to SQL Studio, click this guy and create a new database, call it CRM. Then I'd create a table in my database, call it status. I would not choose the default primary key. I'd choose varchar and probably apply hundreds of primary key length. Why? Because I want status names to be unique, and this ensures that the status types are unique. Why? Because primary keys are unique by default. Then I'd probably add one more field, call it description, use text type as its type, and probably allow for nullable, I'd imagine. So now we have status. These are statuses for accounts. So let's now create our accounts table. Now we will probably want to remove the S here to make sure we have singular form. I'd probably use an auto increment here though. And then I would choose to add a new field called name. This would be the account name or the company name probably. I'd probably not accept nullable here. Then I would add a foreign key pointing into status to its name field, which basically is its primary key. I would remove nullable from here, and I would call it probably status. And then its data type would be text. Why? Because the primary key of the status field is text. I would not apply a default value. So now I have a one-to-many relationship from status to account. So every single status is every single account is pointing to a status. Status might be lead, client, partner, etc. So every single account would then be basically grouped into one of 3 or 4 status types, being leads or clients or partners, etc. Now I would create a contacts table. And yet again, I'd remove the S on the primary key. This one I'd probably use auto increment on and just choose the default settings and click create. And then I would add a field, call it name. This would be the contact name, John Doe. For instance, I'd remove nullable from it. Then, of course, every single human being has stuff such as an email address, data type text, probably accept nullable on this guy in case he didn't have an email. Phone, data type, text, maybe even stuff such as, LinkedIn profile, LinkedIn, data type texts, probably accept nullable here, etc. So I now have the one-to-many relationship from status to accounts. Now I need the one-to-many relationships from contacts to accounts. So now I want to add field. I want to call it account. I want to make it a foreign key. I want to remove nullable. I want it to be an integer type. Remove the default value, pointing it to accounts and the account ID field here. So I now have a one-to-many relationship between accounts and contacts. Let's now look further at the specification. It says that we need activities. Okay, so let's create another table, call it activities. Let's see what it actually does here. Activity ID associated with contact and user and has a type. So these are basically activities such as, for instance, if an employee in using the CRM is calling a contact, then typically that would become an activity. So let's just create the activity here. And then we need an association from activities to contacts. So let's call this contacts, data type, integer, points, let's remove the auto increment, points to table, contacts, points to field, contact ID, not nullable. So now every single activity is associated with a contact, and also every single activity should also be associated with a user. The way we would do this is actually to create a field called username, because this is in a different table, in a different database, because users are declared in a magic database. So we won't actually have any referential integrity from the user here and into the user in magic. However, we could still apply the closest we can come by simply turning this into a text and then doing a couple of tricks as we are CRUDifying the backend, the SQL database afterwards. So let's create a username field here, and then later we will apply some referential integrity tricks. Now let's see what more we want to have. We want to have activity type. Okay, let's create another table, call it activity underscore type. Name of primary key, activity type underscore ID is probably okay. And then we want to have, actually it wasn't okay, so let's just delete that table. Why? Because we actually want to have a unique type, activity underscore types. We want to here use the name and remove the auto increment, use varchar 100 instead. Why? Because we want to have unique activity type names. This would create a unique activity type name, and then we can add another field just for kicks, call it description. Data type, text, we can allow nullable on this one, I guess. Now we need to associate every single activity with an activity type. So activity types can be stuff such as phone meeting, Zoom meeting, physical meeting, send contact and email, etc., etc. So we want to have a foreign key. We want to call it activity underscore type. We want it to be of data type text. We want it to point to table activity type and name. We don't want to allow nullable here because every single activity must have an activity type associated with it. And actually, we're done with the whole CRM system, more or less. The reasons why, of course, is because an SQL database such as this basically functions as a formal specification for the CRUD generator. So we can now go into the CRUD generator, can choose our CRM, and we can, some of these tables we might want to go through and actually configure, such as, for instance, accounts. We see here, okay, it points to status name, looks correct. Let's see what more we need to be able to handle here. Contacts, okay, each contact, we want this to be handled as a phone number. We want this to be handled as an email. We want to have LinkedIn to be handled as a URL. And then we want to have the accounts pointing to the accounts.name. That looks fairly okay. We might want to change our accounts and status, turn off long data here on status. We might want to change activities here, turn off long data on, not on contact, but on activity type. Then we want username to be not locked to user, but handled as a username lookup rather. We don't want to have a row level security here, but we do want to have an association between the value of the username field in our activities database table and the users we actually have in our Magic database. So this actually ensures that. Now, maybe I've done one or two things wrong here, but I actually believe this should be it. So if I now click Credify all tables, the system produces 1 second 1084 lines of code for me automatically. I can now generate my front end. Let me give my front end a name, CRM, templates, Angular, choose some coloring, orange, and then I want to turn off Northwind. I only want to generate the front end for the CRM. Now I want to click generate. Now I'm offered to redirect to hub. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go into HyperID, then I'm going to choose etc. front end source, and I'm going to download my folder here. And now I can start editing the Angular code locally by simply unzipping the file and opening up. Let me just delete these guys. Opening up this folder here using VS Code. So now I'm going to open up this Angular code in VS Code. The simplest way for me to do that, since I'm on a Mac, is actually just to open up a terminal window and then change directory, cd downloads, cd src, and then write code // because I happen to have VS Code in my path on my local machine. Then I'm going to open a new terminal window. Then I'm going to write npm I. This is going to take several minutes. Why? Because the npm needs to download and install every single package that's referenced in this project. So I'm just going to fast forward from now until npm I is done. Now when npm I is done, then I can write ng space serve. And this too is going to take some time. So I'm just going to fast forward here too. Now when ng serve is done, we can switch back to our browser window and we can open up a localhost colon 4200, which is the default port that the Angular stuff is serving our stuff on. Then we're going to have to log in with the username and password from hub. Why? Because it's actually invoking the hub API, right? So let's save this guy. Now we are going to create a new user. Why? Because I'm going to illustrate something here now, which is that if I create a new user here, I call it foo with the password of foo, and I assign it to the role of guests. Now we actually have a problem. Why? Because if I log out and I refresh here and I now log in with foo/foo, I see nothing. Why do I see nothing? Well, in order to understand that, we got to go back to our web API here. So we can just de-expand, etc. We can expand modules. We can expand CRM. And as you can see here, every single HTTP endpoint requires me to being authenticated either as root or admin. Now the foo user happens to be none of these guys. It happens to be just a guest role. So now actually what we can do, we can go back to our MISC. We can open the evaluator. We can load the script. I can't remember which script it was. So let's go through them all until we find it. It's not this guy. Tutorial, oh, not this guy. Tutorial, was it this guy? It's none of these guys. I think it was video 2 something, wasn't it? Tutorial 0204. This guy. Now we want to, so the path of our CRM system is /module/CRM. Remember that guy? Then we want to list all the files recursively. We want to iterate through them. If the file ends with .hl, we want to load the file. We want to transform it into a Lambda object. Then we want to insert before data.connect. However, we also want to do remove -nodes, :x, @ hyper to lambda /* of .ticket.verify. If you remember this one from our second session, then basically what this does, it changes the authorization requirement for every single endpoint we have in our backend. So we can just execute it immediately, at which point we've now updated the authorization requirements for every single HTTP endpoint inside of that module. And we can actually go in here and we can verify it by expanding our CRM and just finding any endpoint we have here. Make sure it says auth.ticket.verify, admin, root, guest down here before data connect, and make sure that this thing is gone, line 16, 17, where it's verifying the user is authorized to access endpoint. So we now changed the authorization requirements. However, we're still left with a problem, which is that if we expand management here and we open up cache in a different window, you see that actually Magic is actually caching the authorization requirements for every single HTTP endpoint in the system. Why? Because traversing every single endpoint, opening them, looking at them, and inspecting them semantically for them to figure out what authorization requirements every single endpoint has is actually a fairly expensive thing. So Magic internally on backend is actually caching this on the server. So if we delete this guy now, then we have removed that cache. However, the endpoint retrieval thing does also apply HTTP cache. So what we want to do here, we want to click F12, we want to check network tab, and then we want to make sure that we are disabling cache here. You see this little checkbox which says disable cache. Turn it on, and then keep the Google Chrome Developers tool open and click Ctrl-R. And you see now we have everything in our system. Why does this occur? Well, because every single component in the Angular frontend is actually dynamically determined whether or not according to the user's roles, whether or not it should be displayed or not. So basically, any user logging into our frontend will only see stuff that he is actually legally allowed to, at the very least, read. So now this user has access to every single HTTP endpoint in our module. So this user can actually create activity types. Call it phone meeting. Description, this is a phone meeting. Hopefully this is going to work, and it did. We can have other types of activities. We can have email sent, and email was sent. We can have other types of activities. Physical meeting description. This is a physical meeting. We don't actually have to apply the description because remember that one was optional when we designed our database, but it doesn't really matter. We can just as well apply them. Then let's create a couple of status fields. Lead. This is a potential future client. Then we can provide client as another status. This is an actual client paying us money. Then we can have, for instance, partner. This is a partner of us helping us contact potential leads to turn them into clients. Okay, so we now have 3 statuses. We have 3 different activity types. Now we can start creating accounts. Accounts are companies. Acme Inc. might be, for instance, a company. Now you see when we choose status, it allows us to select from every single status we just recently created. So we can choose if this Acme Inc. is a lead, client, or a partner. Let's turn it into a lead. Then we can create another client, call it like Nike. Okay, let's say we're doing Nike. Nike is a client of us. Let's add another one, call it Microsoft. Okay, Microsoft is partner of us, etc., etc. Now we can associate contacts with each of these accounts. So first, let's choose an account. As you can see now, this one is automatically populated with every single account. And it's an autocomplete, very important. Why? Because we might have thousands of accounts. We don't want to retrieve every single account every single time we're creating a contact, so we want the ability to search. Let's create an account for Nike. Okay, John Doe is a contact working for Nike. His email is john@doe.com. His phone number is 90909090, and his LinkedIn profile is https://linkedin.com/john_doe. Carriage return, we've now created a contact. It's associated with the account Nike. Then we can keep on creating contacts. Okay, let's create Jane Doe. Jane is working for Microsoft. Okay, Jane@Microsoft.com. Phone 91919191. No LinkedIn profile. It's an optional field, so we don't need to supply it. And now let's create an activity. And this is where it becomes interesting. Why? Because we did have the ability to associate a activity with users. Unfortunately, now we do have a problem. We can't temporarily solve it either by editing our source app services and our HTTP. Sorry, it's not there. It's app components. You see, we're in activities. Then we see here it is using user name lookup on the here we see app username lookup, and this one is using the app magic username lookup component, which we can find in helpers, which we can see here, magic username lookup. This one again is invoking users service / users here. This one again is invoking magic /module / magic / users, the get endpoint. Now we can, if we want to, however, I don't really recommend it. However, let's do it anyways. Actually, we don't need system files. Let's just expand modules. Then let's find magic, and then let's find users further down here. Users get, here we go, and then let's add comma guest. Save it. Now, as you remember, we need to flush out cache, which we can find in management here. Open in a different window, flush out cache. Then we need to reload here to destroy the cache, and now hopefully we're going to be able to retrieve users from our backend, and we did. So this is an activity between the user called foo, which is the currently logged in user. It's an activity towards Jane Doe, and it's an activity type email sent. I sent an email to Jane Doe just now. Save, ta-da, I've done an activity. So now we have basically created a CRM system. Now, of course, we could keep on expanding upon this as we see fit. We could add key performance indicators, charts, dashboards, etc., etc. However, that's an exercise for a later video. This exercise is, as of now, done, and we basically created a CRM in less than 20 minutes. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.